All right, today we're going to unpack what might just be the single most important sentence in the entire Bible. Seriously, it's a verse spoken right at the dawn of time that kind of contains a hidden blueprint for all of human history. So, let's dive in.
What if I told you that the whole story, the epic cosmic conflict, the hero's journey, the ultimate sacrifice, and the final victory, what if all of that was encoded in just one sentence from the very first pages of the Bible? That's exactly what we're looking at today, a verse that many believe is the master key to understanding everything that comes after.
And here it is, Genesis 3:15. This is God speaking directly to the serpent right there in the ruins of the Garden of Eden. Now, I know, on the surface, it just sounds like a really cryptic, ancient curse. But for centuries, theologians and scholars have looked at this and seen something else entirely, something that honestly changes everything. They actually call it the first gospel. And to really get why, you have to feel the weight of this moment. I mean, this isn't just a bad day. This is the absolute lowest point in the human story. The whole project has completely failed. And it's right there in the middle of that catastrophic failure that God speaks this word of promise. And just look at the sequence here. Before God even gets to the punishments for Adam and Eve, he announces a plan of rescue. Grace comes before the penalty. Just think about that for a second. He doesn't wait around for humanity to beg for help or try to fix things. He himself initiates the entire rescue mission.
Now, this has a fancy theological name, the Proto-Evangelium. It's really just Greek for first good news. And the idea is that this one verse is like an acorn that contains all the DNA for the giant oak tree of the entire redemption story. You see, this changes how we read the rest of the Bible. It's not a story about God reacting to a problem. It's the slow, deliberate unfolding of a promise he made from the very, very beginning.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of the verse, starting with that first line, because it's nothing less than a divine declaration of war. But the most important question is, who is declaring it?
The verse doesn't say humanity will decide to resist evil. It says, I will put enmity. This is a divine intervention. God himself sovereignly places this hostility, this resistance to evil into the human heart. Without that divine spark, we wouldn't even want to resist. The war itself is an act of grace.
And this isn't some small skirmish either. This becomes the central conflict of all of history. And once you see its echo on almost every page of the Bible. Cain versus Abel, Pharaoh versus Israel, Saul versus David, all the way to the great dragon warring against the church in Revelation. It's one single, continuous cosmic battle, and it all got started right here.
So, this declaration of war sets up the two opposing sides, right? The two armies in this cosmic conflict. And the Bible calls them the two seeds.
And we've got to be clear here, we're not talking about simple genetics. The serpent's seed is a spiritual lineage. It describes anyone and everyone aligned with rebellion and unbelief. And on the other side, the woman's seed is the line of faith, the people who hold on to God's promise. So it's a war of allegiance, not ancestry. But then, the prophecy gets even more specific.
And this is where the camera lens just zooms in dramatically. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul is looking back at this ancient promise, and he makes this incredible clarification. He points out that the Hebrew word for seed here is singular, not plural. The promise wasn't ultimately about a whole nation of seeds, but about one specific seed, one person. The entire weight of history funnels down to a single individual, Christ.
And have you ever thought about that strange phrasing, the seed of the woman? I mean, in the ancient world and pretty much everywhere else in the Bible, lineage is always traced through the father. This unique phrase right from the very beginning is this incredible, subtle hint of a supernatural birth, one that would come into the world completely separate from the normal line of Adam.
Okay, so we have our two champions. And now we get to the climax of the prophecy, the final confrontation. The verse describes two wounds being inflicted in this ultimate battle, but they are not equal. Not at all. The prophecy is so precise about this. The serpent, it says, will strike the heel of the deliverer. Now, this is a real wound, for sure. It represents intense pain and suffering, but it's not a fatal blow. But in return, the deliverer will crush the serpent's head. And in ancient imagery, the head is everything. It's the seat of life, of authority, of rule. This isn't just an injury, it's an annihilation, a permanent, fatal, authority-destroying blow. But how could that possibly work? Well, the New Testament reveals this beautiful, strategic paradox. At the cross, the serpent strikes. He bruises the heel.
And for all the world, it looks like evil has won. But that very act, the death of the deliverer, was the weapon God used to crush the serpent's head. The moment of apparent defeat was the very mechanism of ultimate victory. It's incredible.
Okay, let's zoom out. Now that we've kind of decoded the verse, we can start to see how it really does provide the blueprint for the entire story that follows.
With this blueprint in mind, suddenly the whole Old Testament starts to look like the story of God protecting this one promised lineage. You can trace it like a golden thread all through history, from Seth to Noah to Abraham all the way to King David, leading directly to Christ. The serpent tries to break this line again and again, with famine, with war, with exile, but the chain is never, ever broken.
You know, this one verse really is a seedbed for almost all of Christian theology. The idea that a champion has to suffer for us, that's atonement. The hint of a supernatural birth, that's the incarnation. The promise of a final decisive victory, well, that's the kingdom and the final judgment. It's all right here, in miniature, just waiting to unfold.
And this perspective reframes everything. It means Christmas isn't just a sentimental story about a baby in a manger. No, it's warfare. It is the long-awaited arrival of the promised warrior king, the seed, landing in enemy-occupied territory to begin the final, decisive battle that was declared all the way back in the garden.
So, I guess we're left with this question. If God embedded the entire story of rescue with such stunning detail in a promise made at the very beginning of it all, what does that say about the promises he's made about how the story will end?